A powerful CEO was seconds away from exposing the biggest corporate fraud in Boston's history when he found a note that made his blood run cold. "We have her." What he did next would cost him everything, or save the only thing that truly mattered. If you believe in courage, in love worth risking everything for, hit that subscribe button right now and share this story with someone who needs to remember that the bravest thing we can do is trust our hearts. Now, let's dive into this powerful emotion journey of love. Jean Morrison's hands wouldn't stop trembling. She stood by the water cooler on the 47th floor of Hayes Global Industries, watching the elevator numbers climb with the focused intensity of someone whose entire life was about to change in the next 60 seconds. The brass numbers glowed as they ascended. 43, 44, 45. Each floor brought her closer to the moment of no return, closer to either salvation or catastrophe. And Jean couldn't tell which one terrified her more. 7:30 in the morning. Mitchell Hayes would step out of that elevator in exactly, she glanced at her watch, 12 seconds. Punctual as sunrise, predictable in his routines, yet completely unpredictable in the way he'd upended everything Jean thought she understood about powerful men. The elevator chimed and Jean's breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat, refusing to move in either direction. This was insane. This was career suicide. This was the kind of desperate, reckless plan that only worked in movies, and even then usually got the protagonist fired or arrested or both. But the documents hidden in her apartment told a story that couldn't be ignored. $3 billion. Corporate fraud on a scale that would destroy everything Mitchell Hayes had built over 30 years. And at the center of it all, the one person Mitchell trusted most in the world. The elevator doors slid open. Mitchell Hayes stepped out, and even after 8 months of working in the same building, even after countless stolen glances and carefully casual observations, Jean felt her stomach flip. He was 52, but carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who'd earned every gray hair at his temples, every distinguished line around his eyes, tall, broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair that somehow made him more handsome rather than older. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Jean's monthly rent, but it was the way he moved that caught her attention, like someone comfortable in his own skin, unhurried despite running a $3 billion empire. Mitchell turned the corner toward the strategy conference room, a leather briefcase in one hand, a coffee from the lobby cafe in the other. His mind was clearly elsewhere, probably already running through the day's agenda. The signing ceremony scheduled for 2 o'clock that would seal the biggest merger of his career. The merger that would destroy him, now or never. Jean let go of the water cooler and swayed. It wasn't entirely an act. The adrenaline coursing through her veins made her genuinely lightheaded, made the floor tilt slightly beneath her feet. Her hand reached out, grasping for the wall, her fingers finding only empty air as she stumbled. "Miss Morrison?" His voice cut through her panic like a lifeline, deep and warm and immediately concerned. Suddenly he was there, moving faster than a man his size should be able to move, and strong hands caught her elbow, steadying her before she could fall. Jean looked up into eyes that were more gray than blue, the color of storm clouds over the Atlantic, and for a moment forgot entirely why she was doing this. Mitchell Hayes held her arm with surprising gentleness, his other hand hovering near her waist, ready to catch her if she fell again. Up close, she could see the flecks of silver in his irises, could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive, cedar and something else she couldn't identify, could feel the warmth of his hands through the thin fabric of her blouse. "I'm sorry," Jean breathed, and the words came out more genuinely than she'd intended. I felt dizzy for a moment. I think I stood up too fast. Here, let me help you sit down." Mitchell guided her toward a nearby chair with a care that seemed entirely disproportionate for a CEO addressing a junior analyst. His hand remained on her arm, supporting her weight, and Jean noticed the way his brow furrowed with concern, the way his entire attention focused on her like nothing else in the world mattered in that moment. He crouched slightly to be at her eye level as she sank into the chair, and Jean realized with a start that he was genuinely worried. Not annoyed about the interruption to his morning routine, not impatient to get to his meeting, worried. "About her. Can I get you some water?" Mitchell asked, his voice softer now, almost tender. "Have you eaten this morning?" "Just coffee," Jean admitted, her heart hammering for reasons that had nothing to do with stage dizziness. Being this close to Mitchell Hayes, seeing the concern etched into his handsome features, feeling the warmth of his hand still steadying her arm. It was overwhelming in ways she hadn't anticipated. "That's not eating." There was a gentle sternness in his voice, almost paternal but not quite, something warmer. "You need to take better care of yourself, Miss Morrison." He'd said her name. Not "Are you all right" to a nameless employee, not someone call medical, but Miss Morrison. He knew who she was. This powerful man, who ran a multinational corporation and probably met hundreds of employees, knew her name. Jean's fingers moved before she could second-guess herself. The note, folded small and pressed carefully into her palm for the past 10 minutes, transferred smoothly from her hand to his where he still held her arm. Just a small slip of paper, barely larger than a business card, but containing information that could save everything Mitchell had built. Or destroy them both. Mitchell's fingers closed around the note automatically, and Jean watched the exact moment realization dawned across his face. His eyes widened slightly, barely perceptible, but she was close enough to see it. His grip on her arm tightened just a fraction, and when his gaze met hers, Jean saw a flash of something intense and complicated. Surprise, understanding, fear, and something else she couldn't quite name. Their eyes locked, and the morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows seemed to freeze, suspending them in this moment of understanding. The note was in his hand. He knew it was deliberate. He knew she'd staged this entire encounter, and from the way he was looking at her, like she'd just handed him something infinitely more precious and dangerous than corporate intelligence, he understood exactly what it meant. "I should get to my desk," Jean said softly, her voice steadier now that the worst part was over. The note was delivered. She'd done what she came to do. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Hayes." She paused, letting the weight settle on the next words. "As always." Mitchell's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. As always, she'd been watching, she'd noticed. She'd seen all those small acts of decency he probably thought went unobserved, the way he thanked the cleaning staff by name, the way he'd quietly arranged for extended medical coverage for the entire financial department after learning that several analysts were struggling with healthcare costs, the way he treated every single person in this building with the same respect. Regardless of their position, she'd seen him, really seen him, and the note was her way of saying so. Mitchell helped her to her feet with exquisite care, his hand lingering on her arm longer than strictly necessary. When Jean looked up at him, she found his expression unreadable, concern and confusion, and something that looked almost like longing, all carefully controlled behind professional courtesy. "Take care of yourself, Miss Morrison," he said quietly, his voice carrying an undercurrent that made her pulse race. "Perhaps visit the medical office if you continue feeling unwell." "I will, thank you." Jean walked away with measured steps, feeling his gaze on her back like a physical touch. She didn't dare look back, didn't trust herself not to reveal how much that brief interaction had shaken her. She'd expected to feel relief once the note was delivered, a weight lifted, mission accomplished. Instead, she felt exposed, seen in a way that had nothing to do with the corporate espionage she'd just committed and everything to do with the man still, standing in that hallway, holding a piece of paper that proved she'd been paying attention to him just as much as she suspected. He'd been paying attention to her. Behind her, Mitchell Hayes stood frozen in the executive corridor, his morning coffee forgotten on a nearby table, his briefcase still in his hand, the note burning against his palm like it was on fire. The woman he'd been fighting his feelings for since the moment she'd walked into that quarterly review meeting 8 months ago. Mitchell waited until Jean disappeared around the corner before he moved. Then he strode to his office with purpose, closing and locking the door behind him before anyone could follow. His hands, usually steady even during billion-dollar negotiations, trembled slightly as he unfolded the note. The handwriting was elegant, precise, the careful script of someone who chose their words deliberately. "Mr. Hayes, the Donovan merger is a trap. Shell companies, Meridian Holdings, Pacific Trust Partners, Silverline Acquisitions, all fronts. Asset transfer clause on page 47 transfers 85% control to Donovan 90 days post-signing. Your half-brother Garrett is involved. He's been transferring funds to offshore accounts. I have proof. Bank records, communications, everything. They're planning to force you out and liquidate the company piece by piece. I know you probably won't believe someone you barely know, but I've checked everything 3 times. This is real. Please be careful. Trust no one." J.M. Mitchell read the note 3 times, each word settling into his consciousness like stones dropping into still water, sending ripples through everything he thought he knew. He'd known about Vincent Donovan's scheme for 3 months, had spent 90 days meticulously documenting every false promise, every hidden clause, every shell company. The SEC had been quietly notified. His legal team was ready. Mitchell had planned to expose the entire fraud at today's signing ceremony in front of cameras and investors, making it impossible for Donovan to escape justice. But Garrett, Mitchell's hand clenched around the note, crumpling it slightly. His half-brother, his father's son from an affair that had torn their family apart when Mitchell was 19. Garrett, who'd been 10 years old and innocent of his parents' mistakes. Garrett, whom Mitchell had brought into Hayes Global 5 years ago despite his mother's objections, despite the painful history, because family was supposed to mean something. Garrett, whom he'd mentored, promoted, trusted. Garrett was betraying him. The evidence of Donovan's fraud, Mitchell had already gathered. But Garrett's involvement? That was new intelligence. Intelligence that Gene Morrison, a junior financial analyst who should have had no access to executive-level documents, had somehow uncovered. Mitchell moved to his desk and pulled up Gene's employee file, something he'd done more times than he cared to admit over the past 8 months. The photo showed her in professional attire, her natural curls pulled back elegantly, her dark eyes intelligent and warm. 28 years old, bachelor's degree in finance from Boston University, graduated summa cum laude. Master's in financial forensics from MIT, 3 years at a consulting firm before joining Hayes Global 8 months ago. The resume was impressive, showed a mind capable of the kind of complex financial analysis that had uncovered Donovan's scheme. But it didn't contain high qualifications considerable for hypocritical senior positions. Didn't explain the careful way she moved through the office, always professional but somehow separate, like someone who'd learned to be invisible. Didn't explain why someone with her obvious brilliance would risk everything, her career, her safety, possibly her life, to warn a CEO she had no reason to protect. Except Gene had said, as always. She'd been watching him, had seen something in him worth saving. Mitchell's intercom buzzed, shattering his thoughts. "Mr. Hayes, you have the strategy meeting in 10 minutes, Patricia's voice reminded him gently. "Thank you, Patricia." Mitchell's voice came out rougher than intended. He cleared his throat. "Actually, cancel that meeting, and I need you to do something for me, quietly." "Of course, sir. Pull the security footage from this morning. Executive floor, 7:20 to 7:40. Send it to my private server." A pause. "Is there a security concern?" "Just a precaution." Mitchell smoothed out the crumpled note, reading it again. "And Patricia? Find out Gene Morrison's schedule today. Which floor she's working on, what meetings she has, but be discreet about it." "The financial analyst?" "Yes." Another pause, longer this time. Patricia had been his assistant for 12 years, long enough to hear things he didn't say. "I'll take care of it right away." Mitchell hung up and immediately dialed another number, one that bypassed the main switchboard entirely. Dominic Reeves answered on the first ring. "Boss?" "Dom, I need you to do something for me. Quietly, carefully, and starting immediately. I'm listening. Gene Morrison, junior analyst in financial. Mitchell paused, choosing his words carefully. "I need to make sure she's safe. But she can't know about it. Can you arrange for additional security on the 32nd floor? Make it look routine. Maintenance checks, standard patrols, whatever makes sense. Additional security for one analyst?" Dominic's voice carried professional curiosity but no judgment. He'd worked for Mitchell long enough to trust his instincts. "What's the threat level?" "Unknown, potentially high. She may have stumbled onto something dangerous. Or deliberately investigated it," Mitchell thought but didn't say. "Just make sure she's protected, Dom. And if anyone unusual shows interest in her, anyone at all, I want to know immediately." "You got it. Anything else?" "Run a background check. Not the standard employment screening. I mean a thorough one. Family, finances, any vulnerabilities someone might exploit?" "You think someone's going to come after her?" Mitchell looked at the note again, at Gene's careful handwriting warning him about Garrett. If she'd uncovered his half-brother's involvement in the fraud, others might discover her investigation. And Vincent Donovan didn't just destroy his enemies, he destroyed anyone connected to them. "I think," Mitchell said carefully, "that she just made herself a target by trying to protect me. And I won't," his voice hardened. I won't let anything happen to her because she was brave enough to save me. Understood. I'll handle it personally. After hanging up, Mitchell allowed himself a moment to lean back in his chair and close his eyes. His heart was still racing, his mind spinning through implications and contingencies, and one thought that kept rising above all the others. Jean Morrison had risked everything for him. This brilliant, careful woman who should have stayed invisible, who should have kept her head down and protected her own position, had deliberately investigated a dangerous conspiracy and then staged an elaborate encounter just to slip him a warning note. She'd trusted him, with explosive information, yes, but also with something more personal. The knowledge that she'd been watching him, seeing him, believing he was worth saving. Mitchell opened his eyes and looked out over Boston's financial district, the morning sun painting the buildings gold. Somewhere in one of those towers, Vincent Donovan was preparing for what he thought would be his greatest triumph. And somewhere in this building, probably sitting at her desk right now, Jean Morrison was terrified about what she'd just done. Having no idea that Mitchell Hayes had been fighting his feelings for her since the day she'd walked into that quarterly review meeting. It had been 8 months ago, a routine Wednesday morning financial review. Mitchell had been reviewing projections with his senior team when Patricia showed a new analyst into the conference room. Jean Morrison, recently hired to replace someone who'd left. She'd worn a simple navy dress that somehow made her luminous, her natural curls styled elegantly around her face. But it wasn't her beauty that had stopped Mitchell mid-sentence, though she was undeniably beautiful, with her glowing olive-toned skin and warm dark eyes. It was the quiet confidence in the way she'd moved, the intelligence that radiated from her even before she spoke, the grace with which she'd handled the barely concealed skepticism from senior executives who didn't appreciate having a new junior analyst in their meeting. And then she'd reviewed the quarterly projections and found an error. A subtle discrepancy in the earnings forecast that would have cost them millions if left uncorrected. While senior analysts with 20 years of experience had nodded along with the numbers, Jean Morrison had raised her hand politely and pointed out the miscalculation with such clarity and confidence that even Gregory Walsh, their CFO, had been forced to acknowledge his mistake. Mitchell had found himself leaning forward, captivated not just by her insight, but by everything about her, the way she spoke, the way she held herself, the intelligence that shone from her eyes when she explained complex financial concepts as if they were simple and obvious. He'd wanted to talk to her after the meeting, to thank her personally for the catch, maybe learn more about her background and how she'd spotted something everyone else had missed. Instead, he'd left the conference room before she could catch his eye, had deliberately avoided the financial department for the next week, had built walls between them before anything could even begin, because Mitchell Hayes knew exactly what happened to people he cared about in his world. He'd watched his wife Emily die slowly from cancer 3 years ago, had seen how his enemies had tried to use her illness as leverage in business negotiations. He'd spent the last 3 years alone, deliberately and carefully alone, because caring about someone made them a target. His world wasn't safe for people he loved. Corporate warfare wasn't fought just in boardrooms. It was fought through threats, intimidation, and attacks on anyone vulnerable. Vincent Donovan alone had destroyed 3 business rivals by targeting their families, their children, everyone they cared about. So Mitchell had stayed alone, built his empire from a safe emotional distance where no one could be used against him, where he never had to choose between protecting someone he loved and protecting his company. But then Jean Morrison had spent 8 months being exactly the kind of person Mitchell couldn't ignore. He'd watched her from afar, unable to help himself, had noticed when she arrived early and stayed late, when she helped other junior analysts with complex projects without taking credit, when she treated the reception staff and maintenance workers with the same respect she showed senior executives. He'd found himself walking past the financial department more often than necessary, catching glimpses of her at her desk, her brow furrowed in concentration as she worked through spreadsheets. He'd learned her coffee order from the cafeteria, vanilla latte with almond milk, and had anonymously arranged for the cafe to stock better almond milk options. He'd discovered she was supporting her grandmother on her salary and had quietly restructured the benefits package for all financial department employees, knowing Jean would never accept direct help. These small acts of protection, of caring from a distance, had been Mitchell's compromise with himself. He could ensure her well-being without getting close enough to make her a target. could watch over her while maintaining the walls that kept her safe. But this morning, Jean had demolished those walls with a folded piece of paper. She'd stepped directly into his world, into his problems, risking herself to save him. And Mitchell couldn't maintain his distance anymore, couldn't pretend he didn't care. His phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Jean Morrison's schedule. At her desk until 11 now. Should be safe, in other words. Visible, in a populated area, surrounded by other employees. Mitchell typed back, "Thank you. One more thing. I need to see her. Schedule a meeting for 11 her in my office. Tell her it's regarding some financial analysis I need reviewed. Keep it vague." He needed to talk to her, needed to understand how much danger she'd put herself in, needed to make sure she understood the risks. Needed to look into those warm, dark eyes and figure out how to protect someone who'd just made herself impossible to protect from a distance. The signing ceremony was 7 hours away. By tonight, Mitchell would expose Vincent Donovan and Garrett, would tear down the fraud scheme they'd built, would save his company with the evidence he'd been gathering for months. But more urgently, more importantly, he needed to save Jean Morrison from the consequences of her own courage. Sometimes the only way to keep someone safe was to step close enough to put yourself between them and danger. And Mitchell was done maintaining careful distance from the woman who'd been brave enough to slip a warning into his hand. Jean sat at her desk trying to focus on a spreadsheet analysis, but the numbers kept blurring together into meaningless columns. Her hands had finally stopped shaking, but her heart still raced every time someone walked past her cubicle. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Given Mitchell Hayes evidence of a fraud scheme that could destroy his company, implicated his own half-brother in the conspiracy, and staged an elaborate dizzy spell to do it. Career suicide didn't even begin to cover the magnitude of what she'd just risked. "Morrison, you look like you're about to pass out for real this time." Todd Brennan, her cubicle neighbor and one of the few colleagues she'd befriended, rolled his chair over with a concerned expression. "Everything okay? I heard you had some kind of dizzy spell on the executive floor this morning." Jean's stomach dropped. Word traveled fast in an office building. "I'm fine. Just stood up too fast. Low blood sugar." "You sure? Because you've been staring at that same spreadsheet for 20 minutes without typing anything." "Just thinking through some calculations," Jean lied, forcing herself to click a few cells and enter random numbers. "Complex stuff." Todd looked unconvinced but mercifully dropped it. "Well, don't work yourself into exhaustion. Not worth it, you know? Just a job. Just a job." Jean almost laughed. If Todd knew what she'd spent the last 3 weeks doing, accessing files above her clearance level, tracing offshore accounts, connecting dots that implicated one of the most powerful men in Boston in corporate fraud, he'd think she was insane. Maybe she was insane. What did she really think would happen? That Mitchell Hayes would read her note, believe a junior analyst he barely knew, and act on intelligence that implicated his own brother? Jean's desk phone rang, making her jump. She picked it up with a hand that betrayed her nervousness. "Jean Morrison, Financial?" "Miss Morrison, this is Patricia calling from Mr. Hayes' office." The executive assistant's voice was professionally warm. "Mr. Hayes would like to meet with you at 11 o'clock this morning to discuss some financial analysis. Would that work with your schedule?" Jean's mouth went completely dry. He wanted to see her. "In his office, in less than 2 hours. Yes, of course, 11 o'clock. Should I bring anything specific?" "Just yourself. Top floor, executive suite. Security will clear you through." The line went dead. Jean sat frozen, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. He'd read the note. He wanted to talk to her. The question was, did he believe her, or was she about to be fired for accessing confidential files and making wild accusations about his family? The next 2 hours crawled by like years. Jean tried to work, tried to focus on her legitimate projects, but her mind kept spinning through scenarios. Best case, Mitchell had believed her and wanted more details. Worst case, he thought she was delusional or attention-seeking and was about to escort her out of the building himself. Middle ground. He'd read the note, wasn't sure what to believe, and wanted to assess whether she was credible or crazy. At exactly 10:55, Jean stood, smoothed her dress, a simple burgundy sheath that was professional without being frumpy, and headed for the elevator. Her reflection in the brass doors showed a composed young woman with elegant twists framing her face. She looked calm, confident, professional. She felt like she was about to vomit. The executive floor looked different in full morning light, more refined than the standard office floors with artwork that probably cost more than Jean's annual salary. Where decisions worth billions got made, where people like Jean Morrison didn't usually venture unless summoned. Patricia greeted her with a smile that seemed genuine. Miss Morrison, right on time. Come in. His voice, deep and commanding even through the door, made her pulse skip. Jean entered, closing the door behind her with a soft click that sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet office. Mitchell Hayes's office was stunning. Everything Jean had imagined and more. Massive windows overlooking the city, elegant furniture that managed to be both expensive and understated. Shelves lined with business books and industry awards. But Jean barely noticed the decor, because Mitchell himself was standing by those windows, turned to face her, and the expression on his face made her forget how to breathe properly. He looked at her with an intensity that had nothing to do with corporate hierarchy and everything to do with something personal, something that made the air between them feel charged. His gray eyes were stormy, troubled, and when they met hers, Jean felt the impact like a physical touch. Miss Morrison. Mitchell's voice was rougher than usual, like he'd been arguing with himself. Thank you for coming. Please sit down. Jean perched on the edge of one of the leather chairs facing his desk, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to keep them from trembling. Mitchell didn't sit behind his desk as she'd expected. That would have been the normal power dynamic. CEO behind massive desk, employee in supplicant chair. Instead, he took the chair beside hers, angling it to face her directly. The proximity was both thrilling and terrifying, put them on the same level in a way that felt deliberately chosen. I read your note, Mitchell said quietly, and Jean's heart stopped completely. Every word, multiple times, and, Jean's voice came out barely above a whisper, and you're either brilliant or reckless or both. Mitchell leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze never leaving hers. The detail in that note, Jean, the specific shell companies, the offshore accounts, the connection to Garrett. That's not information a junior analyst should have access to. How did you find it? He'd called her Jean, not Miss Morrison. The shift to her first name felt intimate, personal, like a wall coming down. I shouldn't have been looking, Jean admitted, meeting his gaze directly despite her fear. I know that, but I was reviewing the Donovan merger projections for a class assignment. I'm taking an advanced financial forensics course at night, and I noticed discrepancies. Small things that didn't add up. Asset valuations that seemed inflated, timing of transfers that seemed suspicious. So you started digging? I couldn't ignore it. The more I looked, the worse it got. Shell companies nested inside shell companies, offshore accounts designed to hide ownership. Transfer clauses buried in legal jargon. Jean's hands moved as she spoke, her passion for the analysis momentarily overwhelming her fear. Mr. Hayes, this isn't just a bad business deal. This is systematic, deliberate fraud designed to steal your company from the inside out. I know. Jean stopped mid-sentence. You know? I've known about Vincent Donovan's plan for 3 months. Mitchell's voice was matter-of-fact, but something flickered in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or anger. I've been documenting everything, building a case with the SEC, preparing to expose the entire scheme at today's signing ceremony. Jean felt the world tilt slightly. You knew? All this time you knew? I knew about Donovan's fraud. What I didn't know? Mitchell's jaw tightened and Jean saw real pain cross his face. What I didn't know was that my half-brother was part of it. That intelligence is new, and it's devastating. The raw honesty in his voice made Jean's chest ache. This wasn't just business to him. Garrett's betrayal had hurt him personally, deeply. I'm sorry, she said softly. I know he's family. I wasn't trying to. Don't apologize for telling me the truth. Mitchell's voice was fierce. Garrett made his choices. You did the right thing warning me, even though you had no obligation to get involved, even though you risked your career to investigate this. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped lower, more intense. Jean, do you understand how dangerous this information is? How much risk you took by investigating this? I couldn't just ignore it, Jean said, her voice stronger now. You've been good to this company, good to your employees. I've watched. She stopped, realizing she was about to reveal too much. You've watched me? Mitchell's voice was quiet, but there was something in it that made Jean's skin warm. Observed, Jean corrected quickly, heat rising in her cheeks. Leadership-style observation. For my MBA coursework, the way you interact with people, the scholarship programs you started, the medical coverage improvements. She met his eyes directly. You're a good man, Mr. Hayes. In a world that doesn't have enough of them, I couldn't stand by and watch you be destroyed by people who don't deserve to shake your hand. Mitchell stared at her for a long moment, and something in his expression cracked. The professional mask slipped just slightly, and beneath it, Jean saw raw emotion, gratitude, wonder, and something else that made her pulse race. You've been watching me, he repeated, softer this time, and it wasn't a question. Just observing how you lead, for educational purposes. It was a half-truth, and from the way Mitchell's eyes softened, he knew it. I see. Mitchell stood abruptly and walked to his desk, and for a moment Jean thought she'd said something wrong, revealed too much. But then he turned back, and his expression was troubled in a way that had nothing to do with corporate fraud. Jean, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. The seriousness in his tone made her straighten. Okay. Vincent Donovan isn't just a bad businessman, he's dangerous. Genuinely dangerous. Mitchell's voice was hard now, protective. I've known him for 20 years. I've watched him destroy people who got in his way, not just their careers, but their lives. Their families, anyone connected to them. A chill ran down Jean's spine. Are you saying I'm in danger? I'm saying that by investigating this, by giving me that note, you may have put yourself at risk. Mitchell crossed back to her, and the intensity in his gray eyes was almost overwhelming. If Donovan or Garrett discover that someone's been digging into their operation, they'll come after them. And I won't... His voice hardened with absolute conviction. I won't let anything happen to you because you were brave enough to warn me. That seems like an overreaction, Jean tried to say, but her voice was shaky. I'm just a junior analyst. Surely, you're not just anything. The words came out sharp, almost harsh, and Mitchell seemed to realize it. He gentled his voice, but not his intensity. Jean, I've already arranged for additional security. You won't see it. It'll look like routine patrols, standard maintenance checks, but there will be people watching, making sure you're safe. You've already arranged security? When? This morning, about 10 minutes after you handed me that note. Mitchell ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair, a gesture that spoke of frustration and something deeper. I won't take chances with your safety. Jean's heart was racing for entirely new reasons. This powerful man had rearranged his security protocols, had taken steps to protect her, had made her safety a priority within minutes of receiving her warning. Why? The question came out as a whisper. Why do you care so much? I'm nobody. Don't. Mitchell's voice was sharp again. Don't call yourself nobody. You're... He stopped himself, visibly pulling back from whatever he'd been about to say. You're a valued employee who took enormous personal risk to help this company. Of course I'm going to make sure you're protected. But it wasn't that simple. Jean could see it in his eyes, in the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, in the tension in his jaw. This wasn't just professional concern for an employee's welfare. This was personal. Mr. Hayes, Mitchell, he said it firmly. If we're being honest with each other, if you're going to risk your career to warn me about my half-brother's betrayal, you should call me Mitchell. Mitchell, Jean repeated, and his name felt intimate on her tongue, like crossing a threshold. What happens now, after the signing this afternoon? Donovan and Garrett will be exposed. I have 3 months of documentation ready to present to the SEC investigators who will be in attendance. Your intelligence about Garrett's specific accounts makes the case airtight. He won't be able to claim ignorance. And me? Mitchell looked at her for a long moment, and Jean saw a war happening behind his eyes. Professional distance fighting with something personal. Something that made her breath catch. You stay visible today. Don't work late. Don't leave the building alone. The signing ceremony starts at 2. I want you there. At the signing? Why? Because you started this, Mitchell said simply. You uncovered crucial evidence. You risked yourself to warn me. You should see it through. He paused. And because I want you there. I want to look out into that audience and know that someone who believes in me is watching. The vulnerability in that admission made Jean's chest tighten. This wasn't the untouchable CEO anymore. This was a man who'd just learned his half-brother was betraying him, who was about to face down enemies in front of cameras and investors, and who wanted one person present who actually gave a damn about him as a human being rather than a business asset. I'll be there, Jean said softly. Mitchell's expression softened, and he reached out, then caught himself, his hand hovering in the air before dropping back to his side. The aborted gesture spoke volumes, like he'd wanted to touch her, to reach for her, but had stopped himself at the last second. Wear your visitor badge. Stay in the back where you're less visible. And Jean... He pulled a business card from his pocket, wrote something on the back, and handed it to her. This is Dominic Reeves, my head of security, his private number. If you feel unsafe at any point today, any point at all, you call him immediately. Don't wait, don't hesitate, promise me. Jean took the card, her fingers brushing his for just a moment. The touch sent electricity through her entire body, I promise. Good. Mitchell stepped back, creating distance between them again, and Jean saw the effort it took him to do it. I'll see you at 2:00. Jean stood, feeling dismissed but also feeling like something fundamental had shifted between them. She walked to the door, then turned back. Mitchell was still watching her, his expression unguarded for just a moment before he schooled it back to professional neutrality. Thank you, Jean said, for believing me, for protecting me, for... She didn't know how to finish that sentence. For being the kind of man worth warning, Mitchell said softly, echoing her earlier words. No one's ever. He trailed off, then seemed to make a decision. No one's ever risked themselves for me before, Jean. Not like this. Not when they had everything to lose and nothing to gain. Their eyes held for a long moment, and Jean felt something shift in her chest. Something warm and terrifying that had nothing to do with professional respect and everything to do with the way Mitchell Hayes was, looking at her like she was precious. I should get back to work, Jean said, her voice barely steady. Be careful, Jean, please. The way he said her name, like a prayer, like a plea, made her heart skip several beats. Jean left his office feeling like the world had tilted on its axis. She'd gone in expecting judgment or dismissal or questions about her methods. Instead, she'd found a man who believed her, who'd already taken steps to protect her, who looked at her like she mattered in ways that went far beyond corporate hierarchy. And for the first time, Jean realized that her feelings about Mitchell Hayes had shifted from admiration to something more complicated, more dangerous. Because that look in his eyes, that almost touch, that raw, please be careful, those weren't the actions of a CEO concerned about an employee. Those were the actions of a man who cared, and Jean was beginning to realize that she cared too. The hours between the meeting and the signing ceremony moved with agonizing slowness. Security personnel seemed to be doing rounds more frequently, always with a casual glance in her direction. Mitchell Hayes was keeping her safe quietly and carefully. Jean also found herself watching the clock, counting down the minutes until 2:00. Part of her was terrified about what would happen at the ceremony. Would Mitchell's plan work? Would Donovan and Garrett be exposed? Would there be retaliation? But another part of her, a part she was only beginning to acknowledge, just wanted to see Mitchell again. Wanted to be in the same room with him, even if it was in a crowd of hundreds. Wanted to watch him take down his enemies with the kind of controlled power that made her pulse race. At 1:30, Jean stood from her desk, smoothed her burgundy dress, and headed for the main conference hall. The building buzzed with energy. This merger was huge news and everyone wanted to witness it. Jean signed in at the registration desk, received her visitor badge, and slipped into the back of the rapidly filling auditorium. The space had been transformed. A stage at the front held an elegant table with 2 chairs, microphones, and stacks of documents. Camera crews from major news outlets lined the sides. Investors and board members filled the premium seats up front. The air hummed with anticipation and the low murmur of important people discussing important things. Jean found a spot near the back corner, partially hidden behind a support column. From here, she could see the stage clearly, but remained relatively inconspicuous. Exactly as Mitchell had wanted. At 1:55, the room began to quiet. Vincent Donovan emerged from backstage, and Jean got her first good look at the man who'd been planning to destroy Mitchell's company. He was in his late 50s, silver-haired and distinguished-looking in an expensive suit. Everything about him projected old money and trustworthiness, the perfect disguise for a corporate predator. Then Garrett Hayes appeared, and Jean's stomach clenched. He looked so much like Mitchell. Same height, same build, same gray eyes. But where Mitchell's features were warm and lived in, Garrett's were sharp and calculating. He smiled at the crowd with practiced charm, playing the role of dutiful VP perfectly. And then Mitchell walked onto the stage. Jean's breath caught. He looked absolutely commanding in a navy suit, his salt and pepper hair perfectly styled, his presence filling the entire room without him saying a word. But Jean could see what others probably couldn't. The slight tension in his shoulders, the carefully controlled emotion in his eyes, the way his jaw was set with determination. He was preparing for battle. Mitchell's eyes swept the crowd, and Jean saw the moment he found her. Their gazes locked across the crowded room, and something passed between them. Acknowledgement, connection, a promise. I see you. You're here. We're doing this together. Jean nodded slightly, and Mitchell's expression softened for just a heartbeat before he turned his attention back to the ceremony. Ladies and gentlemen, Donovan's voice boomed through the microphone, all false warmth and artificial enthusiasm. Thank you for joining us today to witness this historic moment. The merger of Hayes Global Industries and Donovan Enterprises represents a new era in technology innovation. He droned on, laying it on thick about partnership and shared vision and unprecedented opportunities. Jean watched Garrett, saw him nodding along, playing his part. These men were about to steal everything Mitchell had built, and they stood there smiling like benefactors. Jean's hands clenched in her lap. She wanted to scream at them, to expose them right now. But Mitchell had a plan. She had to trust him. And now I'd like to invite Mitchell Hayes to say a few words before we sign. Mitchell stood, approached the microphone, and the room fell completely silent. Even the camera crews seemed to hold their breath. Thank you all for being here, Mitchell began, his voice calm and measured. This merger has been months in the making. Careful negotiations, detailed contracts, extensive due diligence. Vincent and Garrett have worked tirelessly to bring this deal together. He paused, and Jean saw something flicker across his face. Before we proceed with the signing, I have a few documents I'd like everyone to review. For transparency, Mitchell reached for a leather folder on the table, opened it, and froze, his face go completely white. His hand stilled on the folder, his entire body going rigid. Then his head snapped up, his eyes searching the crowd frantically. Looking for her. But Jean wasn't where she'd been standing, because 30 seconds earlier, while everyone's attention had been focused on the stage, two men in security uniforms had appeared on either side of her. One had gripped her arm, the other had pressed something small and hard against her ribs. Don't scream, one of them had whispered. Don't make a sound. Walk with us nice and quiet or you lose your life. Understand? Jean had understood. Understood that these weren't real security guards. Understood that Garrett or Donovan must have discovered her involvement. Understood that she was in very, very real danger. They'd walked her out a side exit while Mitchell was speaking, while every eye was on the stage, while no one was watching the back corner where a petite analyst in a burgundy dress disappeared. Now, as Mitchell stood frozen on that stage, Jean was being marched down a service corridor toward the parking garage, a gun pressed against her side. Her heart hammering with fear and one desperate thought: Mitchell will find me. He promised to protect me. He'll find me. Right now, Mitchell Hayes is staring down the barrel of an impossible choice. The woman he loves, the life he built, everything hanging in the balance. If your heart is pounding and you need to know what happens next, buy me a coffee because your support keeps these stories coming. And also hit the subscribe button so you don't miss how this ends. See you in the second episode coming very, very soon. Thank you.